welcome back to Spoony Squared. I'm Becky, and when I first started this channel, I said that we were going to be focusing on autism and chronic conditions in the workplace and look at it through the eyes of all things career related. Now, most of my videos so far have maybe touched on that a little bit, but haven't gone fully in depth. I've kind of been exploring my own diagnosis and coming to terms with it and figuring out what that means. So today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of disclosing an autism diagnosis to your employer, to your colleagues, to people that you work with. I know many people are self-employed, so kind of out there into the ether, into your contacts, your networks, whoever it may be. So all the different people who exist within your working environments. And if it's your employer, it's a slightly different consideration than if it's, like I said, kind of the wider network, but the implications still might be as big. Now, personally, my default setting is always just to be like, oh, something's going on, I'm gonna talk about it. And I don't like to hide things. However, this is a particular case where we need to think really, really carefully. Obviously, I'm making videos about this online, and I have talked about it online, so many people that I work with do know. There are a couple of places I haven't yet talked about it. I have not talked about it on LinkedIn. Maybe this is the video for it, I'm not sure. And I haven't directly talked about it with kind of new people that I'm working with, but I have talked about it with colleagues in various organizations. I have talked about it on stage at conferences, at workplace conferences. So I've been quite open about my diagnosis, and all in all, for me, the pros outweigh the cons. But that's not always going to be the case, and I know that I'm in a situation where I'm lucky that I'm able to disclose without too many challenges, although I have had some, and I'll talk about them as we go along. So let's start, and maybe let's start with the cons of disclosing to your employer. So you may feel like, okay, there's something going on, I need to express this to the people who I'm working for, I need to, I need to be able to get all the good stuff, I was going to say. I need to be able to get help if I need help and support. I need people to understand what's going on. And we'll go more into the pros in a minute. But there might be things that mean that disclosing is something that you need to think about and that you might choose not to do depending on who your employer or your colleagues are. And the first one is stigma and bias. At the end of the day, there are still many misconceptions about what it is to be autistic, and people kind of carry these thoughts in their heads about and ideas about who an autistic person is and what their capabilities are and what their needs are as well. So somebody who maybe is employing you is going to carry some of those stigmas, some of those biases, potentially. Sometimes it might be positive, sometimes it might be negative, sometimes it might be very neutral. But there is potential that people carry stigma and bias. And whilst it's illegal to be discriminatory against people with autism on the autistic spectrum, discrimination does still exist, and you may face discrimination in the workplace. So by disclosing, people are unlikely to be overt in their discrimination against you because of the legality aspect of it, but they may still be discriminating in lots of different ways. Suddenly got very bright in here. So discrimination can still take place in the workplace, and this is something that can affect your ability to get promotions, to get new opportunities. I've talked before about kind of benevolent oppression. So what often might happen is that people kind of maybe think they're helping you out. They do things for you. They think, oh, I won't give you these opportunities because it might be too much pressure for you, or it might be something that because you're autistic, it's just a little bit too much, so we're not going to give you these extra opportunities. And that means that your opportunity to advance in your career or to show off your skill set could be limited. And I'm kind of very careful. I don't want to make you think that being autistic is just gonna be horrible in the workplace, because that's not necessarily the case. By telling people you're autistic and then they create these kind of they have these biases and they discriminate in a subtle way, then it might be holding you back from career advancement. Now, this is where it has affected me the most, and having only just been diagnosed recently, I don't have many examples of disclosing and then having issues. But what happened to me is that one particular person I was working with, and this was a mixture of autism and having a chronic illness as well, but I very much got this, again, this benevolent oppression. Lots of like, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you need a rest. Maybe you need to, and it meant that I was kind of getting blocked out of doing certain things, which is not okay. It is something that I don't like at all, because actually I thrive more when I really get stuck in and get involved, get to kind of get into that hyper focus mode. That is me at my best, and I was kind of getting blocked out of things. Also, when somebody else kind of gives you this label of being somebody who, oh, maybe can't quite cope with so much, it's very easy to kind of mirror back those thoughts about yourself, especially when you're used to mirroring and masking. And so that was something that was happening, and I started to see myself in this kind of, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should take a bit more of a break, maybe I shouldn't do so much, which of course, so we will talk in other videos about pacing and looking after yourself, but this should be a mindful choice, and it shouldn't mean just getting shut out of all opportunities altogether. The other concern with disclosing is that you may tell, just a couple of people who need to know, but you might not feel totally comfortable that then your medical information is in safe hands. It may be that you feel that your diagnosis is going to get spread to a wider group of people, and that's obviously that's not okay if you haven't asked. Again, this was something that sort of happened to me in a situation where now it wasn't completely explicitly done, but I did have somebody who I work with refer to members of the team who were neurodivergent. They didn't explicitly name me, but it was kind of obvious from or it could have been definitely inferred that it was me. I didn't really mind. I told other people on the team as well, but that's not okay. And if you're in that situation, even if you feel like you're not kind of naming names, often these things can be worked out quite easily. The other thing with disclosing to be aware of is obviously once you've done it, you can't undo it. And so that might make you wary of disclosing. And I think this is why it's worth thinking it through before you put it out there. Wouldn't it be lovely if we were in a world where there was no discrimination, no bias, and that like anyone who happened across the fact that you have a diagnosis was going to be completely unbiased, but actually that doesn't always happen. Now, in the UK and in many countries around the world, it is illegal to discriminate. I've said this already, I'll say it again, it's illegal to discriminate. However, the other thing being that if you do disclose and then you are discriminated against, then you have to make choices about how you move forwards with that, and you may want to go down a legal route, but of course that can be very emotionally, mentally draining, time consuming, very costly in lots of different ways. So even though there won't be kind of legal repercussions against you whether you disclose or not, even though there won't likely be legal repercussions against you, there's still this idea that like you could go down a legal route. So these are all things that you might want to think about before you disclose whether you have an autism, disclose your autism diagnosis to your employer. So these are some of the reasons why you might choose not to disclose to your employer. But of course, there are plenty of reasons that disclosing could be a really good decision. And of course, it's very much your decision. It's up to you. It's up to your individual circumstances. And the first reason for disclosing is that once you've disclosed, you're actually legally, in the UK and in many other countries, then allowed to have access to different types of support, to different environments that are going to allow you to do your work in the best way possible. It might be things like a quiet working environment. It could be flexible working. It could be very specific things to do with which communication methods you use. I think communication methods is a really, really good one, but it's often very, very specific to the specific person. So I know some people who are autistic who like only want to communicate on email. Some people who are like much better when it's on the phone and you can just get to the point, or if it's face to face. For many of us, definitely me included, if I've got too much face-to-face stuff that's going on, I need to have some quiet time too, which is why kind of at-home working, remote working options are also really, really helpful for me. And so once you disclose, you can talk through these things with your employer, or with your colleagues. If you're in a position like me where you don't necessarily have an employer, so to speak, but you do have co-founders, you have teammates, you have other people that you're working with. So you can start to set those strategies that mean that you can work at your absolute best. This also includes you talking about how you might bring more to the team and really showcasing your strengths. Because I think for many of us, after we get a diagnosis, we start to examine not only kind of the deficits, which obviously we know are part of the assessment process, but we also start to look at kind of the things about ourselves that are our strengths that we can bring to the party and the things that we value. And so you can really talk about those with your employer as well. So disclosing allows you to bring things to the fore, which is really, really helpful. The other thing which is similar and has been very, very helpful for me is that there's a greater understanding. It's a greater understanding of who you are, what your needs are, and maybe just why you are a certain way. And when people have that understanding, they are able, this is kind of bad again, but they're able to put you in a new box. They're able to like define you in a certain way. And when they can do that, they're a lot more comfortable with you being who you are. And so that's something that can be very helpful. For me personally, that's been vitally important for myself. I mean, I know you can't disclose to yourself, but I kind of almost needed to disclose to other people in order to be able to then understand myself and my own needs, especially in relation to other people, in relation to colleagues and the workplace. So this understanding, I think, is a really, really important part, which will maybe, and again, it's not necessarily about tangible things that you're going to be given when people understand you. It might be more intangible in terms of like more tolerance, more understanding, more recognizing of your strengths. The other thing is that it can be very stressful to kind of to just be in an environment, to kind of know what you've got going on, but you haven't talked to anyone else about it. And by disclosing, you are going to be reducing your own stress, because you're not thinking all the time about like maybe all those different accommodations, thinking about your own needs, thinking about all your own boundaries. All of that stuff takes so much energy. So if you've disclosed and people are helping you to meet your needs, helping your strengths to shine, then that's going to reduce some of that extra energy and that extra stress. And then the final thing that is really great about disclosing, which has certainly been something that I've heard a lot, is you then get to advocate. And this may not be something that you want to take onto your shoulders at this time. Just because you've got something, it doesn't mean that you have to be advocating for it. But you essentially get to be a role model for other neurodivergent people. You get to be a mouthpiece within your workplace, so you can actually start to make positive changes across the workplace, across your working culture, not just for yourself, but for other people who are neurodivergent, which we know there are so many people. So you are able to become an advocate if you disclose. And so that, I think, is a very powerful position to be in should you choose. And again, like I said, it's not necessarily something you want to take on board. In fact, personally, I have chosen not to do so much of that at the moment, because I've got lots of things going on in my life and lots of strengths. And so getting my diagnosis has led me to a lot of change. And it's made me realize that what I want to do is focus on strengths that I have around leadership, around like building a better workplace around entrepreneurship, and that this is the only thing I do now around advocacy at the moment, other than a little bit within talking about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, because I really, it's just a personal choice. It's just something that I want to do. And I don't want to just go into the workplace and be seen for like, oh, you're a neurodivergent, so that's the only thing you get to talk about now. And I sort of talked about this with labels in the video last week. So those are the pros and the cons. This is such a personal decision. It's something that you need to figure out for yourself and figure out based on your context, your situation. Like I said, there are all these pros, but there are also cons for it. So I think be aware. The more you can build a network and you can start to connect with other people who are neurodivergent, I think that also really helps you to be an advocate for yourself and to maybe be able to disclose. But at the same time, it's not always the right decision for everybody. So do what you need to do. Let me know in the comments what you've been thinking about, whether this is something that's been important to you, and I would love to hear more. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will be back again next week. See you soon. Bye.